Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scrutiny Committee of Basingstoke Borough Council. There are no fire drills scheduled for this evening, so if there's a fire, please leave the building, exits at either end, and assemble in the Memorial Park. I must warn everybody that this meeting is being webcast, and if you're sitting in the front row, then you will be seen on the webcast. I can see nobody is at the present time. Hidden another briefing. Yes, I and other members with mobile phones should switch them off at this point, please. We have some apologies for absence, I believe. Yes, sorry. Councillor Leeks is replaced tonight by Councillor Sherlock. Councillor Still is replaced by Councillor Golding. At our invitation, Councillor Reid is here, and I'll ask her to join us when we start on the topic. I have asked Councillor Goddison if he will sit in as Vice Chairman tonight. I'd be grateful if you'd come forward, Sven, and take the place.
Point of order, Chair.
It's the committee who elects the Vice Chair, not the Chairman.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Well, I will propose that Councillor Goddison be the Vice Chair. Okay. Yes. There being no other nominations, Councillor Goddison can sit down. Being no other nominations, I don't think a vote's necessary. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Now, because I'm late in, I haven't passed out a copy of the work programme proposals that I'm putting forward. All right, they're on the table. I do have a large print edition here. If I can produce that now.
We're just handing out copies now of it.
Okay, but Councillor Regan. I haven't even got my copy. Councillor Regan, despite the best of intentions, I've left your copy and my copy on the printer at home. So. That, of course, is for the end of the agenda. Now, this, I think, is the first meeting of the Scrutiny Committee as it was promised. We are promised a committee that sets its own agenda. We've had 4 meetings, really, on items that other people chose for us. I just want to say a few things about the meetings that we've had, well, how we're going to work so far. We don't have a requirement to suspend standing orders after 3 hours because the requirement is for the chairman to attempt to control the meeting such that it takes no longer than 3 hours. For that I need the support of all the members and perhaps some self-discipline. Questions are a very important part of scrutiny, and I would ask you to, while we're asking questions, confine yourselves to questions, because when statements are made with the questions, the same statements get to be repeated when we're in debate, and that extends the meeting unduly. So I will not be very friendly to people who use the question session to parade the views they've already formed. I would like the question session to be conversational rather than like an interrogation, if we can do that. And when the chairman does decide to make a ruling on time, please respect that. And I want everybody to contribute. So if some people take some time to make up their mind to contribute, I will give them priority when they show their wish to speak. The main item on the agenda, we have minutes of the meeting to look at first. Has everybody seen the minutes? Is everybody happy with the accuracy? Good, thank you. Now, commissioning update. There's been a change in the commissioning timetable. So our original intention we thought, scrutinise the progress so far and the plans for the following year can't be carried out. And we are going to break our scrutiny of commissioning into two sections, one now and one which I'm proposing in the work programme you'll see later to be on the meeting in January. So we have tonight, Simon Christian, I think, is going to make a presentation, is that right? Which those of us who've been to commissioning outcome groups will find familiar. And you've had access to papers. So after that, we'll go straight into the questions that will basically be the scrutiny of what's been happening so far. So Simon, would you like to start? Or sorry, I beg your pardon. Councillor Isaac is the responsible cabinet member, and he's going to open the scrutiny.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors and visitors. As requested, the committee has the report from the commissioning team updating it on progress since Council agreed to undertake a commissioning programme based on its commissioning framework of May 2013. As portfolio holder, I'm pleased with the progress made in this groundbreaking initiative for this council. We are being monitored by other councils and central government, keen to learn from our experience. If I can refer to the report, Ian Briggs, Senior Fellow of the Institute of Local Government Studies from Birmingham University, has said that, quote, Basingstoke and Deane is doing something no other district is doing, and that the council is at an advanced stage of trying to solve some of the challenges faced by the public sector.
Councillor Isaac, it might be useful to confirm as well as the comments by Ian Briggs up at the University of Birmingham. The Local Government Association also hold Basingstoke and Deane as exemplars in commissioning, and for that reason we're contacted on a reasonably frequent basis by other councils for them to learn by the processes that we've gone through and the original documents that we've confirmed.
Thank you. Local government, as we all know, faces enormous challenges in the provision of services and meeting the costs of them at a time of reducing central government funding. It is right that we as a council should be challenging ourselves on whether our services are the right ones to be providing in terms of outcomes for residents, are delivered in the best, most effective and efficient ways to give value for money, and are prioritised correctly, including things we currently do but on the evidence perhaps should not continue to do. Commissioning is one of the ways we can ensure that the council gets the right things done, in the right way, at the right time and for the right price. We agreed that we should commence the commissioning process by establishing commissioning outcome groups as a forum for considering this on the back of a strategic needs assessment. The COGs, if I can call them that, enlist the knowledge, experience of participants, including the voluntary sector, and parties working within the specified service areas. The focus is on better outcomes for residents, and the hoped for results of the process is that by bringing together within the COGs this pool of expertise, it will be creative in developing new ways of thinking about how we should deliver and organise identified service priorities. As councillors and officers, I think we need to reach out to our service delivery partners and others for new ways of thinking about and delivering services. Lead Officer Lisa Kirkman on my left can tell you more about the actual working of the process since we launched the first COG in January of this year and who were the attendees. So far, 4 COGs have been formed covering firstly arts and culture provision in our borough, secondly prevention of homelessness including the reduction in the use of bed and breakfast, third better access to public transport, and fourth reducing neighbourhood crime and antisocial behaviour and the fear and perception of crime. As portfolio holder, I have attended initial introductory meetings, but have deliberately stayed away from the structured cycle of meetings so as not to influence or perhaps inhibit in some way the creative thinking and interaction of the participants, including officers and other councillors. I probably wouldn't inhibit other councillors, I guess. Right, Lisa and her team have facilitated the COG meetings. Based on feedback and comments I've received, I've been impressed with the positive approach taken by the participants and the generally high scoring by attendees of the sessions. Given this is pioneering work, I think that says something rather encouraging for our borough about the benefits of working together and not operating in silos. I would like to take this opportunity this evening of thanking all those organisations who sent representatives, as well as fellow councillors and officers from various departments, for their interest, contributions and giving up of their time. The ideas and recommendations generated by the first COG on how we as a borough should fund and provide arts and culture to residents in future indicate that commissioning is bringing forth a number of potentially creative and worthwhile policy, funding and organisational proposals. These have been evaluated by officers and form the basis of recommendations I will be discussing with Cabinet colleagues in due course, and thereafter with fellow councillors who are members of the Community Environment and Partnerships Policy OSCOM. Inevitably, with a radically new and untried process, there have been a few teething problems. It would have been surprising if there weren't, which I know officers have sought to address whenever highlighted early enough. As portfolio holder, I hope that this scrutiny committee can play its part in drawing out any further lessons so that these may be taken into account in the ensuing COGs. Overwhelmingly, though, I am pleased and excited about the progress that Commission is making in this borough in helping us to formulate new policies to meet the tough and important challenges of delivering valued, high-quality services for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. I'm going to ask Councillor Reid to join us at the table, but first we have one member of the public who is associated with one of the councillor's partners, and as she's representative of that group, I'm going to allow her up to 4 minutes to speak. Joanna Ridhout, I think. Come to the table and press the long rectangular key.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'm chair of Basingstoke Cultural Forum, so I've lived in Basingstoke for well over 20 years and worked with most of the cultural organisations. I'm now freelance, but the Cultural Forum is a voluntary organisation of cultural providers that meet with one-person organisations providing Asian dance up to Anvil Arts and everything in between. So it's quite a range, and libraries, museums, all cultural provision comes in there. Sorry, Discovery Centre. As a forum, we naturally welcome consultation on the new commissioning process and being part of modelling that. It was great to be invited to be part of that, so that we could offer our expertise. Professional and voluntary organisations. Voluntary organisations are often run by 1 to 5 professionals in this context. for specialists in their area. We welcome the workshop approach as well. And as the portfolio holders pointed out, there were some teething problems. We felt that it was more what it's described as, and as a bit more of a touchstone rather than a full consultation process because of the time constraints and the limited time there was to discuss in each session. We estimate that the main funded organisations that were involved in this gave 1 to 2 days per month to this out of their professional time, because in terms of reading the papers, preparing, coming to a half-day COG, and then feeding back afterwards and consultations in between, it took quite a lot of time. Prepared to do that, obviously, and keen to offer that, but felt that we were being called upon for quite a lot of expertise in quite a constrained way. Some of the challenges were and are that there are really complex issues. As you'll appreciate, cultural organisations are cross-cutting, and I notice you've got homelessness here. Well, Paul, who's here with me, runs Drum Runners, works with homeless people. Protest Theatre Company, many of you know, works with victims of domestic violence, and so on. I'm sure you could all give examples of where culture impacts on lives. And we were given lists and lists of things to deal with at every meeting in short 15 to 20-minute sections, and asked for detailed feedback and ideas on them, and felt a little frustrated that we didn't have time to offer creative ideas or to discuss them or to enter into that discursive way of how things could work. There's a lot of talk of outcomes and outputs, and in your papers I notice it says things are mainly measured by outputs. I don't think that's true. A lot of funded organisations, as you'll see if you read annual returns, for some years have highlighted outcomes as well as outputs as a result of Basingstoke and Dean's support in the past, because as cultural organisations we believe that our work is transformative. It's not about bean counting. It is important that numbers are affected, of course, but we want to measure quality of life, and that's part of what we do for Basingstoke and Dean. So we feel that some of the information that is to hand at Basingstoke and Dean was not brought into the COG process. It's there and given year after year, but it didn't inform it in the way we had hoped it would. The limited space for innovation ideas, we're thinking that there must be ways of helping with that, and helping in a more discursive, honest way. We felt there was a slightly hidden agenda. It was unclear what the actual purpose was. This is a touchstone for officers to prepare what they were looking for and to open up for ideas, but it felt as if they're testing out an idea that was already there. And a lot of funded organisations, I'm just reflecting some of the things I've heard, felt that they should turn up because it's in our interest to turn up, not only because we care about Basingstoke, but because this is one of our main supporters who we wanted to continue to be supported by. So that it's some difficult mixed agendas in there, as you'll appreciate. We welcome the opportunity really to contribute more in a more open, discursive way, and wondered if there's a way beyond these quick-fire workshops, which are useful as part of a process, but there have been diminishing attendances as people have been frustrated by the processes. More and more, officers and members there than there are people from cultural organisations each time, and I think that's a sign. So is there a way of improving on this and making it better for the future, so that we can all share our agendas openly and shape the best for cultural provision for the borough from here? Because I think we're all trying to do the same thing, and we're keen to work together in the best way we can. But this process has been of limited use from many cultural organisations' point of view so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, would you like to come and join us at the table? Be happy for you to stay with us. We've invited Councillor Reid as a cabinet member whose functions are subject to one of the cogs. But I think, do you want to make any opening remarks, or shall we ask Simon to give his presentation now?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'm happy to wait until something arises.
Simon?
Chair, perhaps it'd be useful to have a few opening comments. Also to explain, members will be surprised that I'm not involved in the presentation, but my voice is on the way out. So I'm trying to save it for questions, if I can help with that a bit more later on. Just picking up on a few of those points that Joanna's raised, because there are some really important points there, and I definitely wouldn't want them to get lost a little later on. The session length was something that we really worked hard on. And if I let members know the position that officers were in, from senior management group, so our director, chief executives and heads of service, there was concern from an officer point of view, officers outside of the commissioning strategy team, that council business still had to deliver what council business does. It doesn't stop because we're commissioning something. And actually there was concern on that side of the business that they didn't want commissioning to take up too much time. And therefore the session lengths of an hour and a half it was deliberately set to try and restrict it as much as possible, but by getting as much out of the sessions as we possibly could. In terms of the feedback that we've got through the evaluations, definitely early on we heard, actually it'd be really good to spend a bit more time on this. But we spoke to some members about it, and actually what they said is, we could spend all day on this and we probably would still come to the same queries, it's just we'd be able to talk about it more. And the overall feedback that you've got from the sessions, you can see in your briefing paper, 84% said the session length was just right, with 84% again saying that the information they received between those sessions was just right. So I absolutely hear what Joanna says, and I feel, you know, sometimes we get to the end of a session and think, oh, if we could have had another hour on that, that would have been really good. But we were trying to strike a balance, and happy to hear from members about whether you think we've got that right off at the end of this process. But hopefully those few comments will help. Simon's going to take you through the actual presentation that we do in the introductory session. Rather than write something new for scrutiny, why not see what actually all the cogs see when they come along on the process. So I'll hand over to Simon and rest this for a bit. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. If my computer decides to wake up. There we go. Right, to start off with, we start on this slide, which reflects on a bit of work that was undertaken by the new local government network think tank. They developed a report outlining what they thought the future could have in store for district and borough councillors. And in their executive summary, they surmised that if districts are going to be fit for the future, that they must focus relentlessly on achieving the best outcomes for both people and place. And that's really fundamental to the approach that I think we've taken as a commissioning strategy team, and kind of underpins the process as we go on. Put simply, the commissioning programme is about identifying the outcomes that we want to achieve. It's about defining the best way to achieve those outcomes through collaborative service design or redesign. And then it's about establishing how we move from where we are at this moment in time to that future position. Now, we've spoken a little bit about COGS already tonight. And we seem to have frozen one second. There we go. And to put that into a little bit of context to where we are, we agreed a commissioning framework that set out how we were going to undertake our commissioning work in May 2013. That was supported by the Identifying Needs, Strategic Needs and Agreed Priorities document that was put forward in autumn 2013. And from that, the programme objectives were developed and taken forward, and we got the first 6 programme objectives that we were going to look at. On those programme objectives, where we are at, this is just a brief update. Sorry, it's quite small. I appreciate you might not be able to see that at the back. But for the first COG, Arts and Culture, we're at session F. So we've gone through the majority of the process. We've highlighted the scope area that we wanted to look at as a COG. We've then identified the provision under that scope area, started to pull out some of the key outcomes that we should be achieving for both people and place under those two headings, and then use that to generate a substantial amount of ideas, 212 from the first cog, for ideas and suggestions for how we could provide services in the future. We've then gone through a process of appraising those options, and at session F we'll be feeding those back to the cog. At session D, for cog 2, homelessness, so we're just about to go through an options appraisal process with the 128 ideas that cog developed. The access to public transport, cog 3, and the antisocial behaviour relating to the nighttime economy in Basingstoke Town Centre has been amalgamated with the wider antisocial behaviour programme objective, and that was on the back of a recommendation from cog members that attended the first session, and they said you've got two programme objectives that are quite similar, both looking at antisocial behaviour, one specifically looking at the nighttime economy, one looking at the broader borough and the issues that we face. So we decided on the back of that to amalgamate the two programme objectives, and we're at session C with that again, so idea modelling for both cog 3 and cog 4. The commissioning outcome group is the environment to understand current and future outcome requirements of our residents and the borough itself. It's to explore the options for how we could provide services in the future, map the provision that not just we provide but other people are providing within the borough, and how those services are delivered. And then it's to undertake an options appraisal and make some recommendations to portfolio holders at the end of that process. So in order for the commissioning programme to be a smooth running, transparent and engaging process as possible, we tried to identify some key principles, some key ways of working that we wanted the groups to follow. So these are just up on the slides now, but for example, we wanted them to be organic. We wanted them to be collaborative and inclusive. We wanted to create an environment where people could think bravely and think about how they can provide their services differently in the future. This was all underpinned by some principles of shared communication. We wanted strong information exchange between the commissioning strategy team and those that were involved in the commissioning process. We understood that not everybody would be able to attend every session, because either that wouldn't be necessarily relevant to them, or they might not have the time or the resource to do so. So we wanted to make sure that you didn't necessarily have to be at the commissioning outcome group to take part or be involved in that process. We wanted to ensure that cog members felt that they were being listened to, and that they were able to engage in a really constructive dialogue with us and able to actually influence the work that we were doing. And that's been reflected really from the first commissioning outcome group in arts and culture to the commissioning outcome groups that we were running for antisocial behaviour and public transport. The sessions that we run have evolved, and the exercises that we do have changed on the back of feedback and suggestions from those that have been involved. And also we wanted high levels of transparency. So all the information collected at the commissioning outcome groups is available as soon as possible to those people online. It's also emailed round after each session with the commissioning strategy team surmising the key points of that and outlining what we'll be doing at the following sessions. Sort of underpinning the commissioning programme is a governance structure that you'd probably expect, but really just want to draw your attention to two specific groups on there. One is the learning and problem solving group, and this is a sort of an officer-led subgroup really that picks up any challenges that run outside of the remit of a specific cog, because cogs have quite specific programme objectives, and then they have their defined scope areas that they look at. So if things, challenges and learning points fall outside of that remit, we pick those up and pass them to the learning and problem solving group, who sort of try and develop solutions to those specific challenges. We've then got a strategic project board, and that is to monitor the overall progress of the programme and make sure that we are achieving the work and undertaking the work that we need to do, picking up some of the key points from that learning and problem solving group. This slide is the mechanics, and these are in really no specific order, but really represent the key components to a commissioning outcome group. So there's an agreed schedule of meetings so that anybody who would like to attend a session can really plan in advance and engage with their wider organisation and wider teams about the subjects that we're going to cover. There's defined roles and responsibilities that people get sort of spoken through at the introductory sessions, and clear terms of reference at the beginning. We have structured agenda settings because we do have quite a specific time frame to fit in each cog, so that we do feel sometimes quite structured within that. It really, in order to sort of remain focused, we wanted to define the clear parameters within which the cog will live, and really set out what the cogs will and won't do. So to pick out some of those key points, really, the cogs are about taking a long-term strategic view and not focusing on tactical short-term reactive activity. They are about being independent from internal and external operations and taking a bit of an agnostic view, stepping back and saying, well, how could we do this differently if we were to start again? They are about increasingly building up our evidence for why we're investing in particular outcomes, but what they won't do is replace or override political decision making. They won't focus on Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council services only and assume that these are always the best option. At the beginning of each session, we provide everybody who attends with a pack that includes the annual planner and a session schedule. Now, the annual planner is really to assist with planning so that people that attend know when those sessions are going to take place throughout the entire year. So you've got a long period of time to be able to schedule in those particular sessions. The session schedule goes into a little bit more detail on each one of those and outlines specifically what we want to achieve at each session. We don't talk about the individual exercises because that's designed sort of in a bespoke way after each specific session. We then ask, or we put these slides up for the COG members who attend, because we really sort of put it back to them here and say that they're really the nuts and bolts of this approach, and that we ask them to be ambassadors for real continuous improvement, to be sort of really open-minded and proactive in their approach to this commissioning programme, to be prepared to challenge the status quo, the things that we do on a daily basis just for the sake of doing them, and to be creative and brave and entrepreneurial about the solutions that they're willing to put forward. So that's a really quick overview to the process that we go through with commissioning outcome groups, and now we're willing to take some questions.
Thank you, Simon. General questions on the presentation, please, and then anything specifically on the briefing note, after which questions on any of these specific cogs. At no time am I going to stop anybody asking a question, but I would like to try and keep this in orderly packages. But first of all, Councillor Reid, would you like to say anything or ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. No, I have no questions. I can give my impression if you want of the COGs I've attended, or I can just answer any questions if there's anything specific.
I was particularly interested to know if, with the topic for which you're responsible, you're satisfied with the way it's being handled.
I came late to the housing COG because it obviously started before I took over as portfolio holder, so I think I've attended 2 of the sessions so far. I obviously understand with the process it is, first of all, it's innovative, it's new, it's evolving. So I certainly reflect what the officers and what Councillor Eist have said. There might be a few things perhaps that I think we could reflect on and consider whether necessarily they were exactly how we wanted to do things. Just a couple of thoughts. Possibly my main impression, looking at it from a portfolio holder point of view, was that yes, it's fantastic in terms of bringing up lots of new ideas, throwing around ideas which are sort of without any kind of boundary, which is great. But obviously the quid pro quo for that is that some of these ideas, or all of those ideas, have no financial framework. So you're operating in a sort of budget-free vacuum, if you like. And then also that, again, the ideas that come forward from the COG, the officers put them together, they process them, they turn them into documents which then go out to the COG's members for next time. But these obviously aren't seen specifically by council members or indeed by portfolio holder in advance. Now, that of course makes sense if you look at it from the point of view that Simon was talking about, where we're taking an agnostic view. So we want not to have a council-based view on how the COG operates. But it does raise a few questions perhaps for members as to how it operates sort of outside of the normal process.
Thank you. I think that last point will be an interesting theme through this meeting. Now, questions for Simon, please. I've got Councillor Golding to start with.
Thank you, Chair. On the presentation, I can see the point of the annual planner and the schedule very good, but I happen to notice from the briefing note that the final session for COG 1 seems to be on a very different date from the planned date. Have lots of the dates had to slip, and has that undermined the value of having a planner in the first place?
If I can just take the point on two of the COGs, because it's actually a point that I'm quite proud of, that the commissioning strategy team changed something. The one is that we delayed the start of the housing COG because we were in the middle of the flooding. And our housing officers and housing officers from our social landlords had their hands full at Buckskin, and we weren't at that time going to invite them to come along to a COG session about looking forwards at innovative ways of delivering something. They absolutely had their hands full, and that was not the right time. So yes, there was a shift on that one. On the transport, COG 3, unbeknown to us, Hampshire County Council dropped a consultation, and a rather major consultation about cuts in that area. And what we've done is realign the timetable so that when we do our gap analysis and idea modelling, we know what gaps we might have from county, because otherwise we get to the end of the COG and then have a whole new problem to deal with. So we also made that shift in that COG. I don't know with the arts and culture, were there change? No, that's all. It was just the last one. It was just those last two.
Arts and culture isn't changed. The date in the briefing note is wrong because it's not the date on the schedule.
Yeah, it was just the last session of arts and culture that was amended in the end. When we did the original introduction session for arts and culture, although we outlined sort of a possible date, we did give sort of an overarching warning that it was subject to change, as it was the first commissioning outcome group that we were going through, and we wanted to make sure that we paid all of the information and evidence that we were gathering enough attention, so we decided to move that later date.
Thank you, Simon. Supplementaries, we've had that. This is a supplementary to what Councillor Potter, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. I think for Simon first. I mean, if we accept the premise, and I would say straight away I do, that services may be best provided in-house, where in the commissioning process is the scope for that proposition, that the service may well be better provided in-house? I don't see any reference to that in any of the commissioning process that I'm reading.
We haven't specifically mentioned whether a service should be provided internally or externally, specifically because we wanted officers as well as external stakeholders to have the opportunity to put forward their options for how they might want to provide their services in the future, and they might have ideas for how we could develop that service internally, which definitely I would say that we're trying to encourage officers to do when they're at specific sessions, is to think about how they could provide their services differently, and whether that's internally or externally, that would be up to the officer who's had that idea.
I hear what you say, but it just seems to me really as a fundamental tenet of the way this is being approached, it would be reasonable to have a benchmark which talks about the internal provision of a service, and the hypothesis, if it's nothing more than that, that it may best be provided in-house. I see no reference to that. but we'll come back to that later. The other thing I just wanted to check with you, I mean, I think you made mention a minute ago where there's been a sort of fairly quick adjustment in respect to transport because of cuts by the county council. In regard to the homelessness COG, I mean, has there been any adjustment in respect to the dramatic cuts in the supporting people budget? Because that must have massive implications in respect of homelessness and the like, doesn't it?
Councillor Potter, the timing of those cuts came when it could be taken into account with the gap analysis and idea modelling sessions. So there wasn't a huge adjustment needed to that scheduling, but with the transport assessment, it was months out, which is why we had to realign.
Sorry, I don't really understand, I do beg your pardon, but in regard to the cuts in the supporting people budget, all of which people are seeking to deal with, notwithstanding, not least of all, sorry, the portfolio holder, and she'll make her own comments about this. I mean, the impact of that on this COG must be enormous. What are you saying? Sorry, that you've got time to readjust to that, you haven't readjusted to it so far, but you will in the future. What's the position on that?
If I can answer that. I think this is to misunderstand what the process that the COGS is aiming to achieve. We are discussing this. We're discussing these issues with partners. It's not in any way removing the role of councillors and politicians to make the decisions. And if there are decisions to be made in relation to supporting people and the impact of any changes, then that's something that we as councillors will be taking into account. What we're getting from the COGS at the end of the day is recommendations. So it's a contribution to policy formulation. It's not policy formulation per se.
Chair, just to pursue the point a little, but I mean, when it comes to talking to partners, some of whom are providers, all of whom are going to be affected one way or the other by the cuts in the supporting people budget, their commentary, their response, the way they provide their services must be hugely impacted by the cuts introduced by the county council. I don't see how that can't feature in that two-way conversation. Am I missing something here?
The COGS are not the exclusive forum for having discussions with partners about the impact of that, and so we are alert to any further discussions that may be required as a result of the changing environment in which we operate in. But so I don't really see where your problem is on that.
Get Councillor Faulkner, please.
Yeah, just a question regarding the schedules. You mentioned that this program is between 6 months and a year. Is this a one-off exercise, or will these COGS repeat themselves year after year?
Councillor Faulkner, we originally had 21 commissioning objectives to look at that were being programmed over around a 3-year process. Because we needed to see how long they took, if we could do the work in the amount of sessions that we had, we only programmed the first 6. That was 4 to absolutely do in year 1, with 2 in reserve in case we did get through them quicker than we had anticipated. That hasn't happened. We've done those 4 in year 1. So there are the remaining objectives to do. As you've heard from Simon, some of them were amalgamated, and there's some other topics as well which would naturally amalgamate. So there's around 15 objectives that are still needed to be programmed to address in the future.
Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on what Councillor Potter has said and what Councillor Golding was saying in terms of the schedule and how the process has been organised, what I'm trying to get my head around is what is the purpose of these COG groups? Answers on the back of a postcard, please. I don't understand. If we are shaping services, then surely the issues affecting those services in a debate around the table with partners becomes critical, because it's the reality they're dealing with and the reality we are dealing with. I attended that housing homelessness COG when members wanted to discuss around the table the supporting people cuts, and they were steered away from it. That's not what we're discussing today. We're not discussing the cuts in supporting people today. That's not what this COG's about. But they were talking about homelessness, and they were talking about the impact on vulnerable people, and so on. And the scope of that COG was so huge in terms of the services they were covering that surely the issues affecting supporting people were directly relevant. So I can't understand, if we're talking about how those COGs shape services, that those issues would not be relevant to the debate taking place around the table. It's not the only place, nor is it the only agenda involved here. But it's a blooming important one when you've got significant partners sat around the table with you, most of whom are our key housing partners.
Do you want to add to your answer to that point? I think it's been answered, Paul.
Chair, I mean, the only point that I could possibly make, because I was at that session with Councillor Harvey, is that was before the decision on supporting people was made, and at that point there are many things that could be affecting, and we were criticised with that session that when we were trying to identify outcomes, that it was very, was it motherhood and apple pie, because it was very well the ultimate what we want to achieve, but when you identify those outcomes for residents, for place and for borough, that's what we're seeking to achieve. We're saying these are our outcomes, and then those later sessions then look to start about, okay, how we can deliver those. And that's when the idea modelling and the gap analysis comes in. Well, supporting people is a gap, isn't it? So that is something that as the COG goes through that process, but I believe it was session B when we were identifying the scope or the outcomes that you're specifically referring to, Councillor Harvey, and yes, happy to hear members' views on this, but because of the session approach, we do have kind of like a tight remit around each of those sessions. So at that session, at the time that decision hadn't been made, I probably don't think that was a subject that we were looking at. We were looking for those, I know the apple pie comment, but we were looking to identify what those outcomes were.
It's quite surreal because at the one level you have the strategic element that you're talking about. Motherhood and apple pie is a colloquialism, but let's talk about the strategic level you're discussing. And the scope of that is huge. There were things that you'd chosen to exclude, and there were things that you'd chosen to include in terms of things that were off the agenda, in terms of the scope. But that conversation around that table that morning on the various tables, and that's just one session, there were other sessions as well because you took it on from since then, is the point that those partners were discussing things directly relevant to that area. And the cuts were known because they had the report. We had our briefing note that the portfolio holder had pulled together for us. We were very, very aware of the implications. I'll park that and come back to that because I don't think I'm going to get, obviously, the officers of a particular view and the cabinet members of a particular view. My second question relates to who sat around the table on these decisions. Because I think that the conversation, the comments from colleagues in the arts is very important here as to who sat around the table making these decisions. At that COG, we had more officers and members than we had representatives from other partners. And it felt as if those partners sat around the table were not decision takers. So the question begs, are we information gathering from those people who have got genuine contributions to make in terms of their experiences working in those other groups and external organisations? Or are we collecting evidence in relation to how we might shape services, in which case surely we want a conversation with decision takers and those people who are shaping their services. Those people were not the people who we were engaging with in the COG. It was like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Which actual focus are we having in the COG?
Councillor Harvey, a few points, and I hope I'm directly answering the question, but come back to me if I'm not. I would say that the COG, as we know, is an advisory panel or a group of people to the portfolio holder. So it's not making decisions. That is not the decision-making body. It's an advisory to the portfolio holder. And we felt that it was the right approach to take in having councillors, officers, stakeholders, partners, voluntary and community sector round that table, and all of them kind of rolling their sleeves up and discussing something around that. And that's what that approach has been welcomed, I think, because people would much prefer to be in the room than be out of the room and the door closed. So overall, that approach does seem to be working. I accept what you're saying, because I know there was an argument, particularly with the housing COG, that the level of officer that was attending from some of those organisations are not those that can effect change and make those decisions at that high level outside of that.
Or we're aware of those things from their own organisations.
But actually, I think we need to trust the people to take those messages back to their organisations, and that's all we can do as the commissioning strategy teams, and certainly in the form of the information that we put out there, that they can circulate that. I think at the point where we come to make decisions, that's when senior officers, our directors, and those that liaise with them through BASP, through the Voluntary Sector Forum, but those that have that usual liaison, that's where if we need to take it up a few levels, we can take it up a few levels. But those organisations have nominated those people to come along to the group, and I don't know how I could go back to that organisation and saying, we need someone more important than you because you don't make the decisions.
So that's the thing. This is, if I may, Chair, that's the thing for me. I don't wish to be disrespectful for those people at all because they gave up their time. They are professionals. They are volunteers. They came to that COG. They gave their experiences and they made a contribution. That is different from saying what the purpose of the COG is and what you're seeking to get out of it at the end of it in terms of that. So where does, in terms of all your matrix, all your bits, where does the decision-making bit fit in between collecting the information and the cabinet member making a decision on COG 1 at the end of next month?
If we specifically focus on COG 1, because then I can set out the steps that have happened. So we've had COG 1, we've had those sessions, so we've identified the scope, we've identified outcomes, we've done the idea and gap analysis, that was 212, I normally get that number wrong, it's fine, 212 ideas came out of the Arts and Culture COG. We then did some service design and some of those service mechanisms with the group. What happened is we then packaged all of that up in a COG 1 summary, and we've spoken to the portfolio holder about it, as that is an advisory panel to him. What we have then done, and this is the work that we're undertaking now, is, well, what are the corporate implications from that? We can't just put in front of CEP and Cabinet in October those ideas without a little bit of work behind them. So the corporate implications are the usual things that you see in a report. Legal implications, HR implications, financial implications, our corporate risk assessment and our impact, equality impact assessment. So that's the work that we're doing behind some of those options, and that's the information that will be reported in October. Just to put that, yes, commissioning is different, but it still needs to be running along the same corporate decision-making process. We're not trying to put it through a different process or say it's special or different. So that's the process that's going through with the Arts and Culture COG. Does that clarify?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I think we'll come back to your first point when we're talking about recommendations. Can I pitch in a question here, linking what we've just been talking about with what Councillor Potter was asking about? Are council officers involved in delivering services in these sectors similarly involved around the table in these COGs? This council's officers, I mean.
Yes, Chair, they are.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding of the COG operation is that we invite people, in this particular case from the cultural community, to come in and make known their views and ideas and contribute to outcomes. But my understanding is that they are not discussing who pays what for that. Neither, as I understand it, are they discussing who's responsible for what. For example, museums. Museums are a particularly important part of the cultural community, and they're totally not the responsibility of Basingstoke Borough Council. They're totally, wholly with the responsibility of Hampshire County Council. But my understanding is the COGs are effectively led to totally ignore that, because we're looking at outcomes, we're not looking at who pays for it. So if I'm right, I would suggest that the contributors to the COG from external sources to Basingstoke may not understand who's responsible for paying for these things. So could you perhaps help me to understand that they will know that when they're contributing? Thank you.
Councillor Keating, I think if we go back, this is taking us back more to the beginning, around when we set commissioning up. Because we wanted to look at delivering the best outcomes for our residents, we didn't just set the parameters of what we were doing around the things that are solely the what are the responsibilities of Basingstoke and Deane as a district authority. What we said was, if these are the outcomes that our residents need, we will look at them regardless of the fact whether we're the responsible authority. So things like education and transport do feature in our objectives. And that's exactly why, when we word our objectives in the way that we did, we said, what can we do with our partners? And certainly on some of those commissioning outcome groups, we will be able to do more because there is more that we do within that. And on some of those, it will be about how much change we can affect on our partners. But by inviting them into the table, I know, for example, you've specifically mentioned museums. Dr. Janet Owen has really valued the COG process in terms of her and her colleagues have attended every meeting. Thank you, John. John's met with, she's the head of arts and museums at Hampshire County Council. This is just a quote that she made. Personally, I have found the COG process refreshing. It has been both innovative and brave, bringing together key stakeholders to inform how arts and cultural activities are delivered in the borough. So that's just a quote from her. So, pays for what, Councillor Keating?
Are you saying that we're now in a process where we're involved in designing services for museums?
Microphone, yeah.
Beg your pardon. Are you saying that we're now involved in designing and developing the services that museums should produce outcomes from when we don't pay for anything? We're not entitled to, and we shouldn't be asking our taxpayers to pay.
So, Councillor Keating, in the context of museums, there is an idea put forward by the COG, and this is to do with a Hampshire-wide cultural trust that's up and running, and what that will affect. So how that will affect Basingstoke and Deane is currently we grant fund, it's over
247,000.
Portfolio holder for the finance, 200
more than a million.
In terms of museums, that is the amount. So
Talking about now, Councillor Keating.
What's come out of the COG as a recommendation about how we can move forward with museums, and then what we need to do in our corporate implications is say, okay, well, what effect does that have on us, specifically the financials?
I'm not quite sure I understand you correctly, Councillor Keating, but, you know, I do eventually. You know, we are, although the museums are owned and run by Hampshire County Council, soon to be Hampshire Cultural Trust, we are one of the largest contributors in terms of grant to the service, and they recognise that Basingstoke is one of the key towns in terms of museums and galleries. And so they regard us as very important partners, and so I've had an interesting conversation about the future with Janet Owen, and you know, the Milestones Museum is one of the major attractions in Hampshire and in Basingstoke, and they've got great plans for improving. Well, I'd like to surprise you in due course, Sean.
Well, can I just follow up on your line of questioning? I'm interested that you say, Lisa, that the idea has been put forward by the COGS for Hampshire-wide Cultural Trust. And the head of museums for Hampshire is very much approving of the... who originated that idea?
I'm just concerned here because what we're now entering into is policy formation, and I don't think this is the job of this scrutiny committee to be fishing for policy formulation, Chairman. I think if at this early stage, I might even say premature stage of commissioning, if you're interested in understanding what process has gone on, that's fine. But if you're looking to tease out where we're going in terms of policy, that's inappropriate. It hasn't been discussed with Cabinet yet, and nor has it been in front of the relevant Ofcom policy committee.
Well, I was merely asking a question on something teased out by Councillor Keating, but Councillor Keating has a second question.
Yeah, if we can't ask questions about policy, we might as well shut up shop, because that's what scrutiny is about. Can I just ask the next question is, when the codes were sitting, determining the best outcomes that they would like, were they aware that any outcomes which were delivered by council officers would by definition be at least 15% more expensive than the outcome delivered by any other outside body, because the borough council officers are properly remunerated and they have a proper pension scheme. Outside bodies, by definition, are not council officers, and they are less likely to be properly remunerated, and they are certainly unlikely to have the equivalent of the local government pension scheme. So anything delivered by internal employees would be more expensive. Did the COG participants understand that?
Again, I think I'd like to make it clear that the whole commissioning process is not based upon seeking out the cheapest options. Any decisions that are made will be based upon a whole range of things, including the quality of the service that's provided, the reliability of the service provided. So I don't accept the premise, which I think inevitably comes, I think, from your side of the table here, that essentially all we're about here is outsourcing and finding ways to offload council employees. That's just not the case at all. So if I could take the opportunity that now you've given me it to make that point clear, then I'm glad to have done so.
Chair, it would have been nice to have an answer to the question. Did the participants know?
I think we're being told that that's not entirely relevant to our role, and I have to say, I think I do agree with that at this stage, but we will be moving on to making some recommendations. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
I think some clarity is at long last appearing, and I thank Lisa for giving a very good explanation of some of the other questions. I'm going to couch this question in this way. Can I understand that, and you can yes or no it, that the object of the COGS is to identify the outcomes required for our residents and who is delivering current outcomes and who possibly in the future could provide outcomes that are becoming new out of the consultation and the work of the workshops within the COG. That's my understanding, talking about outcomes. There's no relevance to finance. That comes late. That comes later. But it is not the, can you confirm to me that that is not the remit of the COGS? Finance, I've worked in this kind of environment before. You work out what you want, where your goal is, then you look back and analyze whether you can reach that goal. And if you have constraints on finance, you then address it at a different level. Can you confirm that that's really the way the COGS are working?
Yes, Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Cubitt.
Firstly, just say a really good report, and I think your answers have been extremely succinct and made it incredibly clear as to the whole process. One comment I'd just like to make before I get to my question is that Councillor Keating, and I've named him now, which might be an error, seems to have jumped, and I seem to have missed 3 hours of the meeting because I thought we were talking about the process of the COGS, and I don't understand how Councillor Keating got to that point, because either I wasn't here when there was a discussion that took place, or you're making an assumption that we haven't even got to yet. So, but my question is this: is that I love the structure. I like the whole process. I like the whole concept. But in terms of the first COG, as an example, is there something that you could give us as a committee, a scrutiny committee, that demonstrates a change in an identified outcome that wasn't known before, but as a result of the brainstorming with the principal stakeholders arose and enabled us to think more innovatively in order to get what all of us are here for, which is to improve the quality of lives of our residents?
Councillor Cubitt, I think you have confidence in me, don't you? Yeah, and if I say that the answer to that question is yes, that there are some very interesting surprising ideas that have emerged and are worth pursuing, then but I can't tell you about them at this point because it hasn't gone in front of, it hasn't even been briefed in front of Cabinet, and it hasn't gone in front of the policy Ofcom committee. But this is all hopefully going to take place. But if you take my word that actually that as the portfolio holder on the receiving end of some of these ideas that have been generated by the COG, I've been very impressed and excited by what's emerged.
Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
First, I'd like to say that it looks like a really good consultation. My question is around the feedback. So obviously, the satisfaction results are very high. Were the COGs conducted in the same format on every topic?
So we undertook an exercise at each of the COGs in order to draw out the outcomes or what the scope was, and that would change because it's bespoke to the topic. You know, what you talk about in transport is different to what you talk about in housing. So that was very bespoke. We're really pleased with the feedback, and I just want to reassure members, we're not getting feedback because we want to pat ourselves on the back and say, isn't it going well? We wanted the feedback, and we've taken it from stage one because this is a new process, and it's only by getting that feedback where we can get those points and help and learn. And it's the session on here about the we said you said we did. We feed that back at the start of each next COG session. So there are specifically some issues with some strong personalities, kind of maybe taking over some of the debate. So what we did was then remind members at the start that it's, you know, everyone has that opportunity to speak. Some members said that they weren't sure, like they were coming into a session, but they weren't sure what they were trying to achieve in that session. So what we then did is at the start of the session, we said, right, we're doing this exercise. This is why we're doing it. This is where it fits with the session approach. And this is how it feeds into the next one. So we're picking up all that feedback and trying to make those improvements. And certainly each introductory presentation has changed a little as we've gone along the COG process.
Can I just ask as well, because the feedback is an overview of all the COGs, was there one group that had a much higher satisfaction rate than the others? What was the outcome?
Only in terms of the last COG 4 on antisocial behaviour has been a lot higher. I think we got 100% on one session for the last two sessions. At 100%, but so I think, as you know, that's an average. Then you'll know there's certainly none. If one of the COGs had, you know, and it was coming out at 40, 30, 50%, we'd have reported that to members because we'd have want you to know that as part of this process.
So overall, the satisfaction results are going up as the process goes through time. Okay.
Questions. One on the briefing note, please. 6.1 section talks about the training and starts by mentioning the importance of distinguishing between outcomes and outputs, and says that you ran training sessions. Then it lists the outside organisations that participated in those training sessions. At a rough count, that's only about a fifth of the total outside organisations that have placed. So only about despite the importance of the distinction between outcomes and outputs, only about a fifth of the participants had the benefit of being told what it was. Has that been a problem in practice?
And this picks up actually on something Joanna said earlier. I have to say, Councillor Golding, I think a lot of our external organisations are more equipped to deal with outcomes and that shift from output to outcomes than we as officers are, because it has been a massive shift in this organisation to start thinking in that way. So certainly we offer that training to anyone, and above and beyond those specific training sessions, we've also attended board meetings of some of our organisations in order to help them and their board understand those things. So they're the specific training sessions. But no, it hasn't. In some sessions, actually, that shift, but that's why we have the facilitator on each of the tables to try and say, okay, that's an output. What's the outcome? And try and make that shift.
It relates to what Joanna said. She did indicate, I think, that the attendance from outside bodies at the Arts and Culture COG had decreased over time. Do you recognise that as a fact? And if so, again, has there been a problem? And any other comments on?
Certainly, yes, the attendance has diminished. What we had found is early on with some organisations, they might send 2 or 3 representatives, and that might go down to 1. Certainly, as we went through some of the sessions, I know of one particular organisation, because they hadn't briefed their board, they felt they couldn't come along and make representations on behalf of that organisation at that COG. And so we did some work outside of that COG session so that we could take that information from them and use it, but actually they weren't comfortable coming to that particular session. But yes, what Joanna said is accurate.
Can I just add something there? You know, one of the things that, and we're attending here today with wishing to hear councillors' views and participants' views, and to see whether there are things that can be done to improve the process. And one of the things that maybe we need to look at is whether there are too many sessions, and whether we could do the necessary work over less time, but perhaps extend the sessions. But you know, that's something that I'd be interested to hear views on.
I was trying to be very well behaved and follow the chair and only ask questions and not make suggestions at this stage.
In the temporary absence of the chairman, perhaps I could ask Councillor Keating to come in, followed by Councillor Potter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the presentation. What is it? Presentation. Page 1, 2, 3, 4. Page 5. It says a COG is the environment tool. And the question is in relation to the first Olympic circle.
For the Audi ring.
Or the outer ring, yeah. The COG is the environment to understand current and future outcomes. So do you produce a list of current outcomes before you produce a list of future outcomes?
The outcomes aren't distinguished in the 2 lists. What that is really trying to get at, Councillor Keating, is it would be very easy for us to say, what do we need in the next 12 months? And what we're actually looking for from that audience is that horizon scanning to say, okay, well, yes, we need outcomes for the next 12 months, but actually for 5, 10 years, because if we're putting service provision into place, we don't just want to put something into place that lasts 12 months and then expires.
Can I have an answer to the question? Do you have a list of current outcomes? Because we will ultimately have a list of forecast outcomes.
We don't have an individual list for both current and future outcomes. Some organisations currently measure what they do to us in the outcomes, and other organisations do not, and we go through a process of working through what they currently provide and challenging them on that in terms of the ultimate goal of that service provision, and to end up at that strategic level that we were talking about earlier on in terms of what we want to achieve for both people and place.
I beg your pardon, can I do that again? Yeah. Because I didn't have the light on.
Oh, okay.
On the diagram that outlines the decision-making process, you refer to the strategic project board and the learning and problem-solving group. The question is very simple: who sits on each of those groups? Thank you.
Councillor Keating, I chair the strategic project board, and that tends to be attended by the Director of Commissioning and Governance and other heads of service in terms of looking at both the external facing functions of the council as well as internal, as well as we have HR on board and those sorts of people. The Learning and Problem Solving Group is chaired by Dawn Nicol, the Commissioning Strategy Manager, and that tends to be officers kind of at our operational management group level, and people from our Aspire programme in terms of picking up some of those problems. I appreciate the decision-making process being in that one little box doesn't mean to diminish the role that members need to play. If I can just but there's the explanation behind that is when we've put these slides together, we actually didn't know what the committees were called. We didn't know whether it would go. We used to report to EPP, for example. So when we started doing these, we knew that things were changing, so that's why it's quite a vague box in saying what the decision-making process is.
So am I right in interpreting what you're saying is they're all council officers?
On those two, yes, Councillor Keating.
Thank you.
Councillor Potter.
I think a question for Councillor Isaac, if I may. I mean, here we are at the 9th of September, and I think, Councillor Isaac, you were saying to Councillor Cubitt, trust me, I've got some exciting outcomes to tell you about in due course, which you're going to be thrilled by, and that's going to be part of my report that goes to Cabinet at the end of October. So is it fair to say that the decisions about those exciting outcomes have already been taken? That's why you're so excited tonight. Secondly, in regard to the way those decisions have been reached, I mean, I think we heard earlier on, didn't we, that because of the sort of diminishing attendance at the first COG, and because some of the people there might not have been perhaps the sort of movers and shakers within those organisations who make decisions, what process has been, will be taken to actually make sure that other people in those organisations are signing off on some of these exciting outcomes that you're going to be telling us about? I mean, I don't see how that gap is bridged, so I'm sure you can help me on that.
As you know, Councillor Potter, I will try. No, decisions have certainly not already been taken. In fact, if I'm candid, this scrutiny committee is rather too soon. But I've no choice about that. You invited me, and it's an invitation I can't refuse. So it hasn't yet gone in front of Cabinet, even Cabinet briefing. So I don't know what's going to happen there at all. It may be that my Cabinet colleagues decide, well, actually, what you come forward with is actually not something we want to, that we're happy with. Or they may wish to make fundamental changes. But isn't that the democratic process at work here? Isn't that what it's about? In fact, what we try to do, what we try to do here is extend the democratic process by involving all sorts of partners in policy formulation from the word go. Okay, it's not perfect, Labour Party, but then these things rarely are they? How are we going to achieve that? Do you want us to canvass every opinion that we possibly could across the borough before we make any move forward with any policy decisions? I don't think so. We're doing our best. It's not perfect, but it's a start, and it would be good to have your support along the way. Thank you.
Obviously, I'll take that as the lecture it was meant to be, but I mean, the summary of that is Councillor Cubitt shouldn't get too excited at this stage.
I don't think we can cope with all the excitement around the table, but I'm sure it's a chance to come back to see us that makes Councillor Isaac excited. Councillor Harvey. Well, Councillor Gardner. Sorry.
Just taking Councillor Isaac's point there, are we in fact doing this too soon? Because from what I've gathered from the briefings we've had and the discussion, the key point will be when these COGs make their recommendations, those recommendations go to Cabinet, and we then want to see what Cabinet do with them and how it then is implemented to the benefit of the residents. So until the first COG has completed its process, some of the key things that we're interested in haven't as yet happened.
As I did just mention at the beginning that the timetable for commissioning changed. The timing of this meeting was set because the programme published by the commissioning team showed that in August they would be reviewing the past year and producing their plan for the forthcoming year. And so this seemed to be exactly the right time, which I agreed with the corporate director, for us to hold this scrutiny meeting. As a result of the change, we've agreed that this meeting is a finding out meeting, and at the end of this meeting, I think that we may, as we did in an earlier meeting, identify quite a lot of things that we need to find out that we didn't know we needed to find out before. I'm sorry if that's called a fishing expedition, but I think that's part of what we're about. And then I'll be proposing at the end of the meeting we come back to commissioning in January, when there'll be examples of outcomes and examples of everything at different stages. But I still think it's useful and worthwhile. I think we are learning things, and we're finding out what we don't know, and where we need to look for information. Is it Councillor Cubitt now?
Yes, sorry, Chair. The role of scrutiny, we all have to remember from the very outset, from that external guy who was very involved with our amended constitution, is that our principal purpose is to act as a critical friend. And as I understand at the meeting tonight, is to understand the process and to say whether we are, in principle, happy with the process as outlined. And I have to say that Lisa and her colleague Simon and the portfolio have described a process that sounds incredibly sensible, sounds like it's got complete technical backup. They've answered all our questions that are relevant to the process, because there's no point in asking questions about the end game when we're talking about processes today, and I can't see that we can achieve anything else as a scrutiny committee, because certainly we're not here to set policy, we're not here to question policy, we're not here to question financial decisions, because those are all irrelevant, because they are not the process that has been outlined tonight. And I think that the outline tonight is, as I said before, extremely excellent.
Nevertheless, we are still on questions, and as nobody's asked, I have a question, and possibly others. On the briefing note, we have a section on finance, which says financial implications, and it does say that there's a budget for staffing costs, and the balance represented by supplies and services. The CST comprises of 4 staff listed, but there's also a commissioning advisor, I believe. In fact, I know, because she's been extremely helpful. Are his fees and costs included in that figure of 233,000?
Yeah. Councillor Watts, I didn't go into that detail within the financial implications here. One of my members of staff that was on maternity leave, we used Mark Davidson as a commissioning advisor to cover her maternity, so it is within that cost and within that FTE.
Okay, well, I think I know the member of staff you have in mind. I look forward to very much her coming back. I have some perhaps more detailed questions on the report. For example, where am I? On COG 1, can I ask, first of all, the scopes were agreed just by the COG, were there, or has that decision gone to Cabinet or anywhere else? Well, 514 is the paragraph I have in mind.
Nothing has gone outside of the COG anywhere, Chair.
Can I ask why culture doesn't include historic buildings?
At the beginning of the exercise, each COG member that attends is asked to think about the people that are within the COG and who have been involved, and think where they can specifically shape and influence service delivery. So what we did was we looked at the specific impact and influence we had as a collective group over specific areas, and historic buildings was included in the initial definition, and it was brought, but when we fed that back to the group, it was actually found that it deemed that we didn't have sufficient level of influence, or it didn't impact on our outcomes significantly enough to fall within the area within which this COG wanted to look at.
I should mention my ward has one grade 1 building and 3 grade 2 style buildings in it. But am I to understand that something appears in this scope if somebody turned up to a COG who knew about it? Is that the way the decision's been made?
Chair, no, that's not the case at all. Each table undertook the exercise on all the areas. And in fact, in respect of your own ward, I know, and I'm going to forget the lady's name, which is very frustrating, but we've had a really helpful lady from the Whitchurch Silk Mill attend every COG session. I'm so sorry.
I'd have to declare an interest as the council's representative on Whitchurch Silk Mill Trust. So, I'm still at a loss to understand how we've included or excluded something with the COG according to who was sitting at those tables. Haven't we got a circular function there? Because the people at the tables were those we invited, aren't they?
The findings of each commissioning outcome group circulated to the entire list of membership. That does not just represent those that attend. So, for example, the commissioning outcome group for COG 1 is in excess of 150 contact details, and that's a collection of not just people that we've collected ourselves, but that's from information given from those COG members in terms of people who they think should be represented. So as I sort of stated in the presentation, all of the information that's captured at every session is fed back to that entire email list and is also uploaded on our internet webpage. And we're asking for comments in the period of one session and the next session, and it's then we take on board any specific comments that we receive within that period, and then it's agreed by consensus.
Okay, I won't plug this anymore. I think Councillor Keating caught my eye while I was... No, Councillor Cubitt, then, please.
Just as a follow-on, Chair, to that, I mean, whilst we all understand where you're going on that, we are talking about commissioning. And if people can't be bothered to attend discussions for brainstorming with us, who are the most important partner of the subject, then they really don't deserve to be mentioned in the scope or being considered to be commissioned by us.
Well, I think that we're asking questions rather than answering them, but I would say that if nobody knows this is going on, then they're not going to turn off, are they? Councillor Harvey.
Two short questions, Chair. First one, how were members of staff chosen to attend the COGs?
Councillor Harvey, that was by nomination. So if a staff member wanted to attend, they were able to attend. We contacted all the relevant, whether team leaders or managers, but we also highlighted it through all of our whether staff newsletters, or we used to do commissioning staff newsletters specifically on that subject. Now we have the Friday email update that we incorporate our commissioning updates in those emails. Indeed, SMG were very worried about the resource implications, because if every single member of their team wanted to attend a COG session, that is an awful lot of people. And therefore, you know, if that's affecting a frontline delivery service, which is where we work with them with our agenda schedules and talk to them about who can assist or not. We also did a lot of work with the staff forum about how staff wanted to be involved, whether they like to come into the COG sessions, what can we do outside of the COG sessions to upskill, assist, attend team meetings. And certainly I've spoken at every staff briefing we've had since we started them. We've done 3 now, so a year and a half ago, in terms of saying, I'm quite happy to meet and have a cup of tea with you and have a discussion. I'm happy to come to team meetings and just to be contacted in that way. So I hope members of staff feel more at ease now about coming to the team and having that conversation. I think certainly we've made a lot of progress in that area.
Thank you. Councillor Ms. Reid.
I have my second question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure how this works. Are you happy for me to make a contribution as we go along, or do I need to wait to be asked? Okay. I promise not to shout. I promise not to shout, Chair. I can also reflect on COG 1 because I've actually been involved in that right from the start. In fact, I've attended more sessions on that because I should declare an interest. I'm a member of the board of Proteus, council nominee for that. And also have a personal interest because I run an arts-based company. But I can confirm what the officers are saying, that pretty much at every COG meeting, it was made quite clear that if anybody knew anyone else from another organisation that was in any way connected with the arts and would be interested or had something to contribute, they were given the opportunity to pass that information on. So there was no exclusivity at all during the COG process, and it was open to anybody with a connection with the arts to come along. And also, where there were some concerns expressed by some organisations as we went along through the process, I know that the officers and also the portfolio holder made a point of actually going and meeting with the organisations to discuss their concerns. So again, it was a sort of an evolving process, and organisations were encouraged to contribute outside of the simple workshop process as well.
I can confirm, having spent a little amount of time with COG 3, that two people that I nominated are now part of that group. And I think they're the only two, because they happen to be known by a member of the council as experts on public transport. Which brings me to my next question, if I can. I'm coming back to Councillor Harvey. Paragraph 534, which is the scope of COG 3, rail seems to have a very poor place. I do remember at the session I was at that access to stations, bus rail integration, and particular point for me, station car parks were all mentioned, but they don't seem to have passed the cut. How is that?
Councillor Watts, it's not explicit, but it is picked up in the integration, information and communication. Obviously, talking between buses getting to the railway station at the right time, you know, they haven't missed the train 5 minutes, and also transport routes that work for people locally to include key destinations and origins. The railway station would feature as that.
Car parks and cycle storage is a strong thing in my ward. Councillor Harvey's run away. He does, oh no, he's there. Hello.
Thank
Come
you, Chair.
back.
That's all right, I'm just sat here listening. My final question, forgive me as I open up my paperwork. The summary, the outcome summary. When will members of the COG get to see that summary that you're talking about, the actual outcome summary? When do they get to see that in this process?
It's either gone out today, or it, as of 5 o'clock. Simon, have you seen an email? Has it gone?
It's going out first thing tomorrow morning.
It's first thing tomorrow morning. So we've got sign off from the document. I'm quite happy to email it round to all the members of the committee, because you can see the work that's gone into it. We've tried to make it not look like a council report, because it is a COG 1 summary, so it's the work of them. So it's been through graphics quite a few times. I hope you agree it's presented nicely. We've used some visuals rather than using text. So we have put quite a lot of work into it. This is a different process. Why not try and make it look different? Happy to get feedback that you don't like that approach. But I'm also happy to email that to all the members of the Scrutiny Committee when that's issued to the COG 1 members tomorrow morning.
Brilliant. So, as we've just said, Councillor Cubitt, you can get excited about the pictures and the graphs that are involved in it. We're all right there, aren't we? You're using your budget brilliantly, Lisa. I like that.
Any more questions? Councillor Golding.
Supplementary on Councillor Harvis, because the framework on page 3 of 12, F, the final meeting, depending on the decision-making process, a summary of all proposals made by the COG are shared with the group at this session. So now you're saying actually they're getting shared with them ahead of the session. So just, is this a change of process or just something that's happened on?
We didn't know what session F would look like until we got there, and the original plan was for there to be a session approach with everyone in the room at the same time talking about what that looked like. And Councillor Golding, when we looked at some of the options, we realised that actually we might need to be a little bit sensitive to some of those organisations, and that actually it wouldn't be appropriate to have some of those conversations in a room full of all the people. And therefore what we've done on that session is offer one-on-one meetings. So rather than it being the hour-and-a-half session, we've made ourselves available all day to have one-on-one meetings with the COG organisations. So yes, that is an adjustment to change, but when we got there, it wouldn't have been appropriate to have done that in a COG session.
Are you intending to do that for all the COGs, or was it just that arts and culture was particularly sensitive?
I think it will depend on what some of the options and recommendations are, Councillor Golding. I think having got to this stage on this one, I can see that approach of the one-on-one meetings would work best, but I don't want to hand on heart say, yes, that's yes or no, that's the approach, and you use it against me later.
Call for questions. Well now, as I've explained, we are scheduling a further session. when there will be all of this additional data available as to how things have gone, and I hope some decisions on the forward plan, which I was expecting to see by now. Given that the recommendation is that we invite Councillor Isaac back in January, and full of, well, you'll be welcome anyway, but I don't think the rules allow you to go before that. In a sense, that's the proposition, and we need to amend that by what information we would like to gather before then. Have you anything you want to say, Councillor Potter? Well,
well, I do, Chairman. Insofar, obviously, as I was a bit player in this at the beginning, I think, really, and also attended a scoping meeting with you, which was a difficult one in the sense that, I mean, we weren't entirely sure just what the delay in the process was going to result in, and obviously the portfolio holder had made a decision around that time saying this process was going to be extended. But just to remind ourselves, really, and I mean, this committee adopted its own terms of reference on this and talked about reviewing the progress achieved, costs incurred, lessons learned, and blockages to progress within the commissioning process. This was the Scrutiny Committee saying that, no other body, the Scrutiny Committee owning that process. And I think we've got some more work to do on that as a Scrutiny Committee in this intervening period. I mean, clearly, if it's a decision of yourself, Chair, and this committee that we move into January, it doesn't seem unreasonable in terms of timescale. But prior to that, I think there is some work we can usefully do in addition to what we've heard. I mean, I think that we should own what I would describe as a questionnaire to all of those that have been involved in the process thus far, asking our own questions about people's interpretation and reaction to what they've been involved in. And we own that questionnaire. It's not delegated to anybody else. I also think probably there are some experiences that can be gained by talking to other organisations, even local authorities that have gone through some stages of commissioning thus far. Might not be district councils, but there are many that have. And I don't mean necessarily to talk to Birmingham University, who I've got lots of respect for, but I mean are pretty supportive of commissioning, I have to say, and sell courses on it. But we, I'm sure, could find some independent commentary from elsewhere, and I think we should do that in that intervening period. I've done some work on a draft questionnaire, and I'm happy to share that in due course with whoever you say, Chair, and I think that can be perhaps embellished a bit by what I've heard tonight as well. But I think we should own that. We will then have our own information as a Scrutiny Committee in regard to our assessment of the process, and that can fit into your January timetable. I'm sure nobody will object to that, Chair, by the way. It's very anodyne, isn't it?
Yeah. At face value, I can understand the merits of that, but what I'm worried about that, Councillor Potter, is that it sets a precedent, and it's a precedent that almost then starts operating as continuous scrutiny of us by this committee. Where is it going to stop? And I think that no, I don't think it won't. Indeed not. But it should be at the appropriate interval during the process by which we make decisions, not so that you're sort of tapped in throughout the whole day in, day out on this. It's frankly, I just don't think it's a good use of officers.
If the integrity of this committee, that's all I'm talking about. We adopted the terms of reference that govern us in regard to this issue of commissioning. And we talked about the review, including an honest and open appraisal of those involved in the programme so far. Now, I know that's a movable date, but so far to me means what has been going on so far and what's been achieved so far. And we're entitled to ask those questions at whatever juncture we determine is going to be appropriate. In respect to what Councillor Isaac has said, in terms of the scrutiny process, as I understand it, that can be a continuum. And I want it to be a continuum in regard to commissioning over the period of that commissioning process. What's wrong with that? That's the the whole role of scrutiny, as I understand it.
I should explain is that Councillor Keating wants us to document the scrutiny process, and I think we're, in a sense, prototyping it at the moment before we're ready to document it. But I established a principle that rather than in the whole committee trying to plan a meeting, we would have a small group working with the officers. The officers produced an extremely helpful scoping template, and Councillor Potter and I met with a view to plan this. Now, that was much delayed because of my other commitments in July, and Councillor Potter had a holiday in August, and it consequently wasn't as well done as it might have been. And yes, it was a bit mean, wasn't it? Councillor Potter suggested early in that process the questionnaire I was just talking about, but we just didn't meet quick enough to even put it into practice. Otherwise, I would have assumed that we had the right to do it as a part of the scrutiny committee work. Now, it's clear that whatever we're going to do between now and January, in order to plan a competent meeting in January, we'll continue to have meetings of what I hope will be a smaller group. Councillor Keating has said he wants to attend all these groups. I don't, because I'm seeing this as a sort of devolved arrangement, and if the chairman insists it can be at every group, then nobody can seriously believe that it's evolved. But in this particular case, I nominated myself to the group, but we would like somebody else or some other people to join Councillor Potter and I in that process. And I'm looking to my right here, appropriately enough, to see if there's somebody else who would take part in this further planning of scrutiny of commissioning. No, I don't see any. I don't know whether Mrs. Reid, being here, can tell someone to do it. Yeah. Well, let's leave that in the air. Let's leave that in the air. Clearly, we're not going to keep calling the 14 of us together to progress this, and interested and intelligent people will be welcome. Now, I think we need to take the cabinet member with us on this, and I would prefer to approach it by reassuring you than by confronting you on that. Some of the terminology in the Constitution is odd because it says we can require him to attend, in which case we could have required him to abandon his attempt on Mont Blanc later this month or whatever he was planning to do. But that isn't the way things work. But that is a proposition which I personally support, that we consider a questionnaire to go to all those people who've got some useful information to give us. Is that a fair summary? And then later on we'll decide who those useful people are. Councillor Mrs. Reid. Yes, Councillor James was, I'm sorry, you were so eager to speak, and it was too important speaking myself.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, thank you to the officers. I asked no questions because the briefing papers told me everything I needed to know, and I feel a bit more assured about the process, if not totally. In terms of the questionnaire, I think what would be really, really important is obviously COG 1 is now reaching its conclusion, and we hold our questionnaire to the point at which COG 1 has its conclusion and reports, and whether we go with the final report that goes to CEL committee or whether we go for the final conclusion of the cabinet, to then ask the people what they think, because obviously there's lots of, they've enjoyed the sessions, they've enjoyed the taking the tea and the biscuits, they've enjoyed meeting the officers, enjoyed sitting around the table. I want to see if they're still satisfied with the process when it's reached a conclusion and a decision has been made, because it's clearly important that those who've contributed have felt their contribution has been valued. So I think that's the point in which we really need to question people about what they got out of it and what we took from them and used.
On the other hand, if we want subjective comments on the process, and if we leave it until they've got the outcome, people might report on whether they think the outcome was right or not, rather than on the process. Think about this.
If someone's taken part in the process and hasn't resolved in a decent outcome, then the process possibly hasn't been successful.
Councillor Keating.
if we're going to get a preliminary report about the COG1 arrangements in the next few days, then I suggest we wait for receipt of that, give us a chance to read it, and we can respond in writing individually.
Councillor Cubit.
I think what Councillor Keating just said is very sensible. I think what Councillor Keating just said is extremely sensible.
All I'm standing us out about is all the things we're going to do between now and January. That suggestion that we wait until we've got that report before we have a meeting is a good one. Do I take it that nobody is against the idea of a questionnaire? But sorry, I'm not catching the eye of Councillor Isaac on that one. Councillor Ms Edwards or Ms Edwards? Golding. Oh, Golding.
I would agree with Councillor Gavin James. I think that to do a questionnaire on COG1 immediately after it's finished, you could start that at the beginning of November because it should have gone to portfolio holder in October. You've got 2 months to get the answers back in and analysed before January. I think that would be a very, very helpful start. And then you might have more ideas of what questions you want to ask for 2, 3 and 4 when you see how it pans out with 1.
Okay. For the webcast, Mrs. Cupid is nodding.
I'm nodding too.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. What do we know tonight? What have we done tonight? We've heard from our officer team, who have, of course, championed their corner in respect of the work they're doing, and you would not expect them to do anything other than the report is exactly as the report I would expect it to be from the commissioning team, and I thank them for it, but it's exactly what I would expect. Thank you very much. The portfolio holder has given us his view, and of course he holds his view because he's the champion for this. And again, thank you very much for the opinions. I respect them, but disagree with you on a political level, but that's not what we're here sat around the table doing. It's a piece of work for scrutiny, and that's a different thing entirely, which is where the continual examination element does come in, because it is this scrutiny. It's not just our role as a body here, it's the performance panel, it's the audit committee. All of those elements of this council have a continual monitoring role of our executive, and so they should. So what have we achieved? We've also heard from one of the key participants of COG1, who represents a significant proportion of the forum. The forum represents a significant proportion of the organisations involved. And we've heard that they felt that the COGs were a touchstone. They weren't a full examination. They weren't, in their words, it was a limited part in the process, was the words that we used. They felt that it was focused on numbers and not necessarily quality. That was what we've heard this evening. We've also heard that they felt there was a slightly hidden agenda and felt that the officers were testing ideas that were already formed. That was what was said. We've also heard them say that it was danger drawing too many conclusions because of the concerns that have been raised. That contribution, I think, should shape, from a scrutiny point of view, the examination that we have going forward. Because here's an independent perspective of somebody operating in the sector, giving us a view of their view of the experience they've been through. With all due respect, it isn't our officers or the portfolio holder, it's something else entirely. So the questionnaire, I think, is incredibly valid in collating what would then be an objective piece of evidence to a certain extent of views of those participants. I do agree with Councillor Golding, it would be relevant to do it for COGS 2, 3 and so on. The questionnaire would need to be shaped, and I think the task and finish panel would need to bear that in mind for each of those so that we get the actual questions right for the COG we're inquiring about. I think there's another element to this which we need to pick up on, which is our statutory role. And we shouldn't forget this. Councillors have a statutory duty to put in place arrangements that will result in the continual improvement of service delivery. That is our statutory responsibility that we have devolved to the Cabinet in our Cabinet system. However, one of the issues with commissioning is that in many of the models that are being used, and Birmingham would say this, wouldn't they, but as other colleagues have said, they're selling courses on this, and they do a professional postgraduate courses in public service commissioning. So this is part of their academic work. There's many other academics I could pick on to give a different view and a different perspective. That's not the point. The point is that commissioning can greatly restrict the role of elected members to simply establishing service outcome requirements. Now, if that is what we're doing, and from what we've heard, And from what we've analysed so far, that is what we are doing. And we're then relying on the cabinet system to deliver the outcomes, if you like, completely. Then there are questions that we could relevantly ask of the process of the member input in the decision making that goes on post the outcome summary. So there's a whole range of little bits here that we can begin to unpack legitimately. That's scrutiny. Where's the democratic deficit in this, in that respect? Where's the element of the participants' views being reflected in our work? So, Chair, I think you should do a questionnaire. Whether it's held over, you can get the information now. They have a view about how they felt about the COG process now. That information we can collate, and the sooner the better, because it will then give us time to analyse it and understand it. And secondly, Chair, there are those elements around the process of member involvement that we should look at as well. And that's no disrespect to the Cabinet, because the Cabinet members are doing his job and the officers are doing what they've been asked to do. So there's a whole range of things that we could choose to unpack once we have the evidence. But let's get the evidence from those participants first, I think.
Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you, Chairman. Sometimes I think I'm in a parallel universe here, because it seems to me that what we've done here with commissioning is actually sought to broaden the policy formulation process. As I've said before, not perfect, we haven't got everyone, we've made every effort, we've invited people to attend. But this is not in some way pushing elected councillors to one side, not at all. We are the democratic process as we know it at Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council is going to continue as before. It's going to be discussed by the Cabinet members. It'll go before the Community Environment and Partnership Ofcom, and I look forward to hearing their commentary on any proposals that we bring to them and any ideas they have for making improvements. And in due course it goes to full council, or certainly to Cabinet anyway. So I think actually what we've done here, interestingly and rather innovatively and in an exciting way, is actually increase democracy in Basingstoke and Dean. And I think actually I'd like to take the opportunity now of thanking the officers for their terrific hard work in this pioneering work that is beset with all sorts of difficulties, because you can't please all the people all the time, and you never will.
Yes, Councillor Golding, then Councillor James.
Chair, I need to say I had suggested waiting till the start of November to make sure that the COG knew what was in the report, because they might have a very different view if they thought they'd said A and what was probably B. But thinking about it afterwards, of course, they're getting it in writing tomorrow morning, so it doesn't need to wait till after their meeting in October. But so that was my thinking anyway.
Gavin James.
It's really to pick up on Councillor Isaac's point about the democratic process still taking place. I have to confess to having no interest in any COG because I've not been to a single one. Unfortunately, I work for a living, which means I can't attend day meetings very often, and all the COG meetings are during the day. I completely understand that, because actually it does make sense to engage with the professionals, whether you're working with the housing providers. You really want the people who deal with our housing department on a daily basis, not their regional director or something, to actually come in and contribute to what do you think the service is like, how could it be improved, how could it be developed. So I totally get and totally understand that. What I have a fear of is I have sat in cabinet meetings and I've sat in committee meetings where the portfolio holder has turned around to me and said, well, come on, we've been doing this process since April and you've never mentioned it until now. So I just wanted assurance that obviously when I see that report, and I will obviously attend, probably see EP if I get the papers and I think it's important for me to attend that, I'm not a member of that committee, or I turn up at cabinet, I don't want my comments dismissed because I've not been able to attend, through no fault of my own, any of the pre-meetings, and I have to turn up and say, I have an opinion on this, and not to have that written off because, well, we've been discussing this since April, there's been lots of opportunity, you haven't brought it up before now. So I just want to get his assurance, and there's another portfolio holder in the room as well, I'd like to get her assurance as well, because then I feel much, much more loved. Thank you.
Does anyone want to give any assurance?
Yes, assuming that there is a paper that gets taken to cabinet, and I don't make any assumptions on that front, really. But that will be my intention, obviously, given all the hard work that's gone into this. But you have my assurance that I will not be making that comment if you speak.
Councillor Kirvett?
Yeah, I said it's Councillor Sanders that normally says to us, you haven't got a right set, because you should have said it 5 months beforehand normally. But anyway, we digress slightly. I think a lot of the points that Councillor Harvey makes are extremely valid. However, if we're going to do an evaluation of how well the COG has gone, we all have to remember, and I think it's really important, is that we're not here to serve them, we're here to serve the residents. And what we don't want to end up is being so heavily lobbied by people who have vested interests and who actually have been not fulfilling or enabling us to fulfill the desires of our residents, because they're more interested in the way they run their organisation and not what they're supposed to be doing and what we're supposed to be commissioning them for, which is providing the best service possible for our residents.
There's one thing I'd like to remind you that our visiting speaker did mention, that before the attendance started to drop, there was confusion among the participants and suspicion there was a hidden agenda. Now that's a worrying thing to say, but it's not anything you can really test, because if it's hidden, there won't be any evidence for it. But that's the sort of reason why I would like to get fairly soon some feedback from people, because I'm sure Councillor Isaac will be as worried as I am if that's a significant view.
Yeah, Chairman, yes, absolutely. But I can honestly say, as portfolio holder, that I'm not aware of any hidden agendas, and I just would like to just redress the balance somewhat here. When you look at the feedback and the high scoring we've had that's in the paper, and I think I do hear what Jane Riddott said, but I don't think she actually attended a COG meeting. So she speaks with remarkable authority on the failings and shortcomings of the COGs, but didn't actually attend one. Now, maybe she was not able to attend, and I'm sure she had representatives there. But I just think let's get a bit of perspective on things.
We'll do with the questionnaire. Well, everybody's in favour of a questionnaire. There has been some doubt about when it should form. But first of all, the question of the content of the questionnaire. Councillor Edwards, you asked some very interesting questions about the feedback when you were questioning Lisa and Simon. I'm sure you would make a very useful contribution into what sort of questionnaire will give us even better feedback.
So what type of questions should be asked, is that?
What I'm suggesting is that you could join myself and Councillor Potter, and indeed anyone else who wants to turn up as a working group to progress this.
It would have to be an evening, as I do work full time.
I think we can manage evenings, can't we? On holiday in the evenings, eh? Yes, we welcome that. You define evening, I mean, through the officers, and I'll meet you then, and if he doesn't turn up, then so well and good. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just perhaps a helpful addition. Nothing to do with the commissioning strategy team at all, but we've got an equalities officer within the council that might be quite useful in terms of putting any questionnaire together from that point of view, and I'd be happy to put her in contact with whoever's leading on putting that together in case that assists members.
Well, that would be very good. I mean, I'm all in favour of any interested and willing person taking part, but I need to know that there's a core group who can be expected to take part. And if after we've had a chance to read and absorb the report that's forthcoming, then Councillor Potter and I hope Councillor Edwards will meet with anyone else who wants to turn up, even Councillor Keating, yes,
You were so reluctantly.
to work on a questionnaire. Now, obviously, we want the officers from commissioning to be involved in that, and either through them or directly Councillor Isaac, because I don't want us to be a separate and parallel, appear to be a separate and parallel management structure, but we are here to do scrutiny. And that, the information from that will come to the meeting in January. Also, that group, I hope, will collate together any other indication we're given of other information we need, so that we can adequately, and we'll have plenty of time to plan the January meeting so that there'll be an abundance of stuff for people to read. The one councillor here has told me that councillors don't read a document before they come to meetings. Well, if you're one of those, then please resign from the Scrutiny Committee. And then we'll be able to do something. But finally, we have got to end then with a report. The debate between Councillors Isaac and Harvey as to whether we're going continuous scrutiny, I think it's not necessary to concentrate on. This is a process that we're going to finish in January. And if there's any further process, that will be discussed in due course. Is everybody content with that as the outcome of this meeting?
Absolutely. I go along with that. I'm just asking a sort of supplementary on the development of this questionnaire. It's a very technical exercise anyway, but is that questionnaire specifically for COG 1, or is it meant to be for all COGs? Because there are different emphasis as you go through COGs 1 to 4, and you go to different population. You should develop a questionnaire targeted to your audience, and look very closely at the questions that you want to come back, really. I don't know if you're aware, but questionnaires are a very skilled, technical process to go through. I think what we're looking for is probably an outline template questionnaire, and then you can tweak it for the various COGs. That would be my feeling, but I think the officers might even give us guidance on it.
That's a very helpful question. I was thinking in terms of a questionnaire going to every participant, but it doesn't mean it has to be the same questionnaire going to every participant, and perhaps we pick up from there. Any other comments or advice? Councillor Potter,
I mean, just to put it on record, I've done some work thus far on the questionnaire that I think will be appropriate. I don't claim for a second to have the expertise that Councillor Miller has on these sort of things, but I'll take advice on that, and clearly we'll refine it further with your assistance and perhaps Councillor Edwards if she's going to get involved one evening with you and I can't imagine anything more exciting for her. But we'll put something together which I think will meet the purposes that we have as a scrutiny committee. What I would want from the officers, it goes without saying, is chapter and verse in regard to the list of people to whom those questionnaires should go. And I mean, clearly that's mostly an admin task, quite frankly, and but it will concentrate obviously on the COG 1 process, because that's where we will draw the lessons. What we do after that's another thing altogether, but you know, we will concentrate on COG 1. End of story, really. I hope tonight, really.
Well, I'm not quite happy with you ending like that, because we have very different people participating in the different COGs, and I would like to get some feedback from each of those. But obviously, we don't ask them specific questions about COG 1. But let's get together and talk about it, and then we can expose it to other people's comments and see how we go. We have got time, I think. Anything else?
Well, we know from the questionnaire and the paper that the responses from subsequent participants and subsequent COGs was greater than the earlier ones. We've got to caveat the response that whatever questionnaire is going to produce. But I've already said before, I mean, I think our role here as critical friends is to look at the process. Are we happy with the process? A questionnaire is something that's quite interesting to put it on the table, but I think this is 2 years premature. And I think the questionnaire that should be going out is not to the stakeholders who might be upset because their nose is going to be put out of joint, because we're going to go for somebody else who's going to give us a better outcome for our residents. So I actually think that whilst we've fleshed out some interesting points, I think our final conclusion of this meeting is a bit farcical. I think by the fact that not many people want to be involved in actually putting together the questionnaire tells it all. And I think whilst it's been a useful session, I think it is absolutely futile to be asking the first COG before anything happens, whether the stakeholders' notices have been put out of joint or not, when actually our raison d'etre is to improve the services to our residents at the best price in the most innovative way. And I don't believe that any questionnaire to the current stakeholders who bothered to turn up for the first COG is going to achieve that.
I can only say that's noted. I don't think that we're going to take a vote on it because I've already summed up. I'll make one point. There is a little point of contention as to whether the Constitution is accurate or not, but as far as the Constitution is concerned, commissioning is our responsibility, not CEP. Although I expect that will change because I'm urgently seeking a meeting with the Constitutional Working Group.
I'm content to leave that to the two committee chairmen to resolve. But always happy to attend wherever it's right for me to attend constitutionally. I'd just like to say something to support of what Councillor Cubitt says about the questionnaire. I know that the committee's decided it's going to have a questionnaire, but you know, I would make the point that commissioning is not a static process, and therefore, while having no doubt that the answers you'll get to the questionnaires will be entirely objective, we are going to have winners and we're going to have losers, and therefore you will have to make a judgment about what the value of the information you get back from these questionnaires. But I leave that to you.
Well, as a long-standing director and manager of auditors, audit's a snapshot at a period in time, and we have to take a snapshot at some time. We've now decided when we're doing it. Rob.
I can clarify for the record, because one or two things have been said, and as the chair of Community Environment and Partnerships, we are not taking responsibility for looking at all the COG reports or COGs as such. We will be looking at the outcomes of the COGs that deal with policies within the areas covered by our committee. So we will be looking at arts, and we will be looking at transport. We will not be looking at homelessness. At least that's not my intention, because I'm quite sure the other committee that deals with housing would be much more inclined to want to look at the outcome of the homelessness.
You're quite right. You know why it's uppermost in my mind, but let's move on. That's very good of you. Yes. Now, the work programme. Unfortunately, I produced a copy that was flagged in red where the changes were, but the technology isn't up to that. You know now why we have scheduled another session for commissioning in January. And I have to say the Constitution gives me the responsibility for the work programme in consultation with all of you, and I'm happy to hear from any of you. We had already agreed that the low-cost housing and social landlords should be the main subjects of the November meeting. And of course, we will have a report from the performance panel because it's a cyclical thing. Thank you very much, John. Well, excellent, of course, yes. There are still documents floating about, in fact, that say that this committee is going to review the budget. If you remember, I was in favour of waiting until I could consult other chairs, but this, at its first meeting, all those people who were speaking, apart from me, were saying we will not review the budget, so it doesn't appear on here. I think further discussions with the Constitutional Working Party might sort out exactly what's mandatory on us. So that isn't in the January date. We will have another report from the performance panel in January. And the people who've scoped the registered social landlords scrutiny have recommended that we have a second session on that, as you can see on the second page of this paper. Now, life's full of surprises, and I was surprised to discover that we had to deal with Stagecoach, and I was surprised to discover that we had a call-in. I'm very surprised to discover that the internal audit team have my name down as responsible for clearing an audit action that was scheduled for the completion of the end of September. And I am responsible for ensuring that this committee reviews all the scrutiny functions of the council. Now, the deadline for that now is the end of March, which is just as well, because, of course, the answer was there weren't any other than tonight, probably, if we did it by the end of September. So that we will have to have a team to plan for that. If you look under March, yes.
Can I ask you, by that, do you mean that it's suggestive that this committee, through you as chair, sign off on the governance statement that's in the audit? Is that what you're saying? Or is just an internal review process that
There's somebody on my behalf before this committee was appointed signed off on the audit to say that I would be responsible for this. But this is scrutiny functions. This is we're reviewing what we've done and what the other overview and scrutiny committees have done. Incidentally, although Many Down doesn't have scrutiny in its title, it does have it in its terms of reference. So we'll be reviewing all of that. Clearly, since most of the scrutiny that will have been done is by this committee, we need to plan for some independent input. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes absurd. But that's why it's on the programme. I'm only explaining that now.
In answer to Councillor Harvey, I'm quite sure it's Councillor Marks that's responsible for signing off on the balance sheet and the annual report on behalf of the entire council. His responsibility for governance of this council.
Not within the scope of this meeting, so I say. And the last thing that I'd overlooked, we, against my wishes, the committee decided it is going to have the Stagecoach relationship come back. So I've recommended that's scheduled for March. We'll get an update on the partnership with Stagecoaches as I've written it there. Now, as it happens, I know that the CEP committee has scheduled 2 sessions on public transport between now and then, and I think we need to watch the situation to work out exactly what the relationship is.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I think the relationship is certainly needs watching because it isn't quite working. What we decided we wanted to do in CEP was to have a brief update next week on what that COG's terms of reference were, what it had done so far, and what it was proposing to do, so we could decide whether we could afford to wait until it produced some outcomes or whether we needed to do anything before then. We were not asking for a report on the further discussions with Stagecoach, but if you look at our papers, the report that we're provided with does cover all that, which will probably then need to come back to you as well. So we were not trying to get that, we just wanted to know about the COG, but what we got was a lot more than we asked for.
Yes, well, that's it. We review our work programme at each meeting, and sorry, Councillor Bregan.
See, I'm going to talk about the buses. It's I thought we was going to review this, but in like after the review that the Stagecoach had promised of their routes, in conjunction with the county council's review of their subsidised services, and they report back in January. I'm a bit disappointed, or even angry, to see it's been pushed back even further to March.
This is the first time it's got a date. I've actually looked at the webcast today to check what was said then, and indeed, you'd be right in saying that it was between a very short time and 6 months was what was said. The minutes actually say 6 to 8 months, but the reason it is 8 months, March, is because we've got a very full meeting in January. That's the reason I've proposed that. But as I said, if the CEP committee is receiving reports on the Stagecoach thing, whether they ask for them or not, we just need to keep in touch and watch the situation and make sure any information that's available is available to everyone.
The update is Stagecoach show no signs of reviewing their commercial services as promised in the Gazette from our meeting on the 30th of June. They're doing piecemeal improvements, which are welcome, but they're only slight. There's still great chunks of this town that don't have a proper bus service. So, and they're showing no signs of improvement. So I still like that to be brought forward.
Rob, will that be covered in the report that your committee is considering?
As I say, what we wanted to do within our work programme was just make sure that the policy outcomes of the COG had gone through a policy committee before there were any decisions were made by the cabinet member or cabinet. And because we didn't want to wait to the end of the process and then be told that he's gone, we should have intervened earlier. We thought as we'd got the chance with transport, unlike arts, we would find out now what they're doing or what they're proposing to do to see whether we wanted to have any input. But beyond that, we were not planning to do anything now. I don't know to what extent, till I've had the briefing on what the COG are doing, to what extent the COG are getting involved in this stagecoach issue, or to what extent they're looking at other things. So I'm afraid I can't be any more specific in answer to your question than that, but we're definitely not trying to take over the work that you had started. We were just trying to make sure that we did our job in relation to the COG.
You said you've received a report that does cover that.
A report has been issued and is on the website, and when I get my paper copy, I will read it, but I'm told it's got a lot of stuff in it that I wasn't expecting.
I mean, I sit on the transport COG, and there was nothing. I mean, Stagecoach actually sit on it as well. And the only improvement the COG made is because I could bend the ear of the Stagecoach managing director and the manager of commercial services and get some slight improvements. But the COG, the whole outcome of the COG has produced nothing in terms of improving transport. I mean, it was just they're talking shops. They don't produce anything actually. I mean, that's my take on it actually, and I will carry on going to them because I want to carry on talking to Stagecoach. But nowhere it talked about access. Nowhere did it tackle the number 4 subsidised county council bus service that was not disabled accessible. You couldn't make it up. I mean, it's serving the hospital, and people with wheelchairs couldn't get on the bus. I mean, it never tackled that.
Are you proposing that the review on the update on the partnership with Stagecoach be brought forward at a January meeting? I've explained it's because of the congestion of January meeting that it's scheduled like that, but I don't mind long meetings, so I'd like a vote on whether we should bring that forward or not. Those in favour of what Councillor Regan suggested? Well, it doesn't seem that that's a sufficient number. But those against it, please, sorry. Nobody's against it.
I'm not. May I?
Well, hang on, you can when I hadn't called for the vote. Yes, you can. Oh, you wanted... What do you, I've got Mr. Councillor Keating ahead of yourself. Oh.
Just for clarification on the last item, is that agreed and brought forward?
Yes,
thank you. The point I wanted to make was separate to that, and it was in relation to items to be timetabled. And my understanding is on the previous item, no, my understanding was wrong, but nonetheless, the issue that I wanted to raise was the question of the review of recycling. Recycling has been a matter of concern to this council for some considerable time, and I mean years rather than months, and I believe it is critical to the reputation of this council that we timetable a review of recycling as early as possible. I do know from the press that the portfolio holder is very keen to revisit the issue of recycling and recycling performance. So I'm sure she would accommodate whatever we would wish to do. But I'm simply raising it as an item which has been highlighted by the performance panel and which has been highlighted by previous performance panels as well. It's critical to the reputation of this council that we do something about it. Thank you.
Can I, have you looked at the single item on the second page of this report as it's copied here? Referred to CEP with involvement of Chairman of Performance Panel, Wednesday, 12th of November. Well, I think the Chairman of CEP wants to say something, so I'll call him.
Yes, indeed the portfolio holder is keen to do this. She has been working with officers. She has some proposals that she wants the views of committee looking forward on proposed policy changes. We are planning to put it on the 12th of November meeting. That will be my recommendation to CEP next week. Assuming CEP agrees that, so it becomes a formal thing, it is then my intention to invite the chairman of the performance panel to come and do essentially what a portfolio holder does and sit at the table and join in the debate. But I haven't formally issued an invitation until the committee has formally agreed to put it on the work programme for the 12th of November.
Okay, well, I just wanted to confirm that nobody did vote against the decision to bring that item forward, so we will see exactly how well we can fit all the material in on January. No, Miller.
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of the committee, I think you've got all three chairmen sitting on this committee of the two policy committees. If I could just explain something about why we're addressing the work programs at every meeting, because certainly in my case, in Councillor Golding's case, and it's very evident for Councillor Watts as well, we try and accommodate what the members want to bring to the committee, but it's in our own power to do it. The committees are setting their own work program. The trouble is we require the inputs at an appropriate time. I found it in mine as well. I'm reliant on a COG for homelessness. I know, and I'm the first one to support that it comes to the committee as soon as possible, but it isn't going to come to the committee. We can't even timetable it till sometime in the new year because we don't have the evidence required to bring it before the committees. And this is what constrains us. All three of us are working very closely with the officers, very closely with committee services. On probably every other day we're talking at the moment, trying to get the right things into the committee with the right ammunition and the right evidence for the committee members to take a view on it. And I'll tell you, it's not an easy process. And that's why, Councillor Reagan, if I could say it to you, I know your desires and your passion for wanting to address that, but without the evidence, there's very little we can do. And there's the uncertainty, I think, is why you see things going into the to be timetabled slot, because we just can't do it. As soon as we do, we flip it into the first available slot. We also are allowing a little bit of flexibility in our programs that if something really does have to come to the committee, we've got a little bit of wriggle room, if you like. We can either focus on it, we can focus on what we've programmed adequately within the 3 hours of the committee. If something else comes in, well, we can time manage it probably a little better, but at least we get the matters before the committee members. And that's what we're trying to do all the time. So please rest assured, it's not just shoveling out of the way for, because we don't want to address it, it's because we don't have the evidence. And you wouldn't want to sit in the committee and not have anything to cut your teeth on. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
Because we're all in the same boat, all the three chairmen at the moment.
Councillor Harvey, I think we're really nearly finished, aren't we?
I hope so. no one disagrees with any of what's been said. I think the complementary nature of the two policy committees, and this is where that we're at. If, and it's right that we do this, the Scrutiny Committee does the piece of work on housing in the way that's described, and I think that the scoping report's written up well in terms of the meeting we had, and it's here for everybody else to see, then what that would enable the Policy Committee to do, which it should do, is then examine the policy implications of what falls out of our discussion around in particular, because we shouldn't be debating what we do with the 25 million that's been put in the budget, but the Policy Committee should. Our issue is around what the implications are, the problems are, highlighting the points around the affordable housing issue. So, Chair, on that one, I appreciate I don't think the COGS, and this is a matter of opinion, I respect this from the Chair, and this is from an administration point of view, so I understand this. If it is, it is. If it isn't, I've got it wrong, I understand. But it shouldn't be the COGS driving your agenda. The policy issues that arise as the business of this council, so our housing strategy, the local plan issues, all of those elements that are the continuing business of the authority should also play a key part where some of these issues will roll out. We need to shape how that 25 million is going to be used and what delivery mechanisms may or may not then be recommended to the Cabinet. It's the Cabinet decision at the end of the day, but the Policy Committee can help the Cabinet and should help the Cabinet understand members' views on such an important, and that's just one very particular example, the whole range of other bits. On the RSLs, the RSL issue is very relevant. CEP is doing a piece of work around the environmental issues that are broader than what we've raised specifically with the RSLs. But our committee, looking at RSLs in the best practice element, which is a scrutiny element, coming back in March, so slipping the RSL bit from January to March, would give us the time, one, to do the piece of scoping element you're talking about in November as our committee. It gives CEP the space to do its job, which can then better inform us through our officers in March of what a piece of best practice should be. That's the sort of coordination of the timing that would help. It would also free up your piece of agenda on January to give you space for Councillor Regan's points about transport, which are relevant because the COG ain't going to answer it, and neither is CEP, because that's not what CEP's focus of their discussion is. Forgive me if I'm prejudging what Councillor Miller's going to face on Thursday by even raising it tonight, because obviously that discussion's got to take place on the work programme, hasn't it? But if that was what EPH decided to do on Thursday night, that would help us, wouldn't it, in terms of shaping who's doing what and the benefit of each committee coexisting, complementing each other's work, really. And isn't that what we're supposed to be doing?
I can assure Councillor Harvey that the COGS aren't driving our agenda. We have a number of very useful bits of work that have been proposed by members from across the board on the committee. But equally, the COGS are a fact of life, and I'm not going to let them proceed without policy input. So that we that's what we're doing. We're making sure that if they're there, we don't ignore them.
Can I say that's a very important matter? Councillor Edwards.
Completely off topic. Councillor Cubitt apologises. She's had to leave early. She needs to go back to the hospital, just for the record.
Thank you, Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. What I wanted to say has already been said. Thank you.
Is there anything we should have done we haven't done?
Do you just want to double confirm what exactly is going where on the work programme?
The only change is that from what you've got is the stagecoach review will be in January.
Okay.